I believe that's one of the best intros that we have on YouTube today, guys. I have to say, even though it's mine, I don't want to be biased, but I think it's a really amazing intro because of the we play in it and that association with the supernatural and the occult. So if you're new here, welcome to the Reveal Report. I'm your host, George Iceman, and we discuss things that are not normal, that are abnormal, that are supernatural, that are occult, that are fringe, that are esoteric. I spent 13 years studying demonology, paranormal, the occult, rituals, and I wanted to do this show 4 years ago, and I thought I would have about 12 people watching, and it was just going to be a pastime. Man, have we really blown up here, and I'm really happy with where it's gone. 50,000 or so subscribers on YouTube, almost 10,000 on Telegram, over 10 or 12,000 on Twitter. And to be honest, I actually don't use social media too much. So that's pretty great and natural in growth. And I appreciate all the love and support. Many of you gravitate to this show to hear about things that no one else talks about. Mind you, there are a couple of really good shows on YouTube. One recent one that I'm seeing some really good stuff. And my hats go off to all the people in this space contributing and trying to bring knowledge to the platform. And any of you who see this, guys, and want to share a certain clip on social media because of something you like, please do show. Just please credit the Reveal Report. So again, I appreciate you guys for being here. The topic today is going to be bloodlines of magic. And many years ago, there was a book that came out. It was a huge book. Many people talked about this. It opened up a lot of eyes, and it was called Bloodlines of the Illuminati. However, there's a challenge when saying these words, Illuminati, the elite, because they're supposedly those that are above everyone else. So I wanted to talk about bloodlines that are not necessarily those that have all the power in the world or all the money, but are influential to those who are in those positions, and they want to use that magic. And we've discussed this before, so you guys are well aware that they say that magic is in the blood. And what does that mean? We're going to get into that. We're going to get into the magic connection and the power that it holds with the blood, how it's passed on to generation. Now, the magic, some people are saying MAJIK, is kind of like something that's brought on upon from Alistair Crowley and other with dark semblances. I didn't want to use that in the description because I don't want to attract a certain base. People are going to come here and say, hey, what are they talking about? Is it occultic in nature where we're teaching that? No, we're not teaching that part of it. So I wanted to leave that out and just call it regular magic, where everyone knows what we mean. And basically, it's playing with the supernatural and making miracles happen to their advantage, to make things happen and manifest for their own desire using some type of magical power. So that's the premise. That's the show. We're going to have a guest that's going to come on and talk about this stuff. We're going to dive right into it. So grab your popcorn, grab your favorite snacks, your tea, your coffee, your water. And I'm going to bring on my co-host, who is an author and was a former chaplain and helped a lot of people, wanted to spread more of what her experiences were in the world. She wrote a few books, and she's been with us for a few years. And she's got a great ministry where she goes out and tries to raise money and helps many different people in many different types of situations, as well as travel and really dive into the book. So please welcome Miss Jessie Czebotar. Hey, Jessie.
Hey, hello.
Well, it's been a while since we've touched on this particular subject like this, and I thought, what a great time to do it, because we only get them maybe once a month, actually once every 6 weeks or so now, I believe. Yeah. Gary Wayne is back.
Yay.
And I just, when he starts talking, you need to fasten your seatbelts, folks, because
I've got my notebook and pen and paper out.
He could go in 20 different
Gary talks.
He could get it to 20 different directions. We don't know where he's going, and I love it. So again, guys, we're very privileged. And I would say to those that love this topic, when Gary's on, it's kind of like a master class.
Yeah.
And this master class, you might have to go back a few times to pick up because he'll give you so much in such a small period of time that it's just so much. So again, grab your pens. You might have to go back and watch this. It's going to be incredible. All right. It's enough of the intro. Let's bring him on. Please welcome Mr. Gary Wayne. Gary, how are you?
Well, doing very well, and thank you for such a tremendous introduction. And so happy to be back and to talk about wherever we're going to go with this conversation. And hopefully, we'll have people taking notes. That's a great thing. That would be just awesome if people tuned into the shows with their notebook all of the time, and then they could make sure that they were going back when they saw the shows again, that they covered off everything that they wanted to get the detail on. So it's a good idea. I like it.
Yeah. Gary, you're getting really popular now. Sometimes your name will pop up in one of my feeds, and I'll tune in and I see like 30,000 views, 40,000 views on a particular topic that you're doing. You're growing and you're getting more popular in this space. So congratulations.
Yes, and been very busy last couple of years for sure, particularly with book 2 coming out in the spring. And so, and some of the audiences are, getting to be, even larger than that. So I'm trying to manage my time, trying to manage the shows, and it's the calendars fill up like 6 months in advance. So I try and leave some dates open for things that I expect and can slide in. But it's been quite a ride, and hopefully it's been good for the audience, because if they're not going to watch, then it's all over.
It's all they're loving it. They're loving it. Gary.
I think they love it. Everybody loves it.
Gary, let's begin. Bloodlines of Magic. One of the first people that I was introduced to going back was somebody by the name of John Todd. And John Todd was a occultist / Satanist who comes from a very prominent family. He was very popular in the 70s, where he started going to churches and preaching his experiences, giving his testimony. No one actually filmed that I could find, but there was audio, and his audio tapes are available all over the place. He seemed to have vanished later on. Some people say he went to jail, but all the research on that doesn't really find that. John Todd again made his public appearances, and he claims that he was a witch, he was a Satanist, he worked with the Illuminati. And he would claim that the Illuminati were plotting against Christians, and they had a plot to take over the entire world. In 1988, Todd was convicted in South Carolina on charges of rape. Interesting. And sentenced to 30 years in prison. In 2004, he was released from prison and placed in a psychiatric facility, where he died in 2007. Now, that's the story that's published, of course. How true it is, we really don't know. But I'm going to play a clip of one of his tapes that talks about who he is, where he came from, and his family lineage. His name, which is important because his name was Collins from Scotland. I'm going to play this for everybody. Take a quick listen. Remember, there were no cell phones back then. There were no laptops or computers. So the information that he's putting out, where would he have gotten this information from? Remember, this is very important, because now anyone could say that they were a former witch. Now anyone could say, oh, I was Illuminati, I was this, I was that, because you do some research on the internet and then you figure out some things and you're able to answer that. Back then, that did not exist. There was no encyclopedias. There was no books about Satanism and this power structure of 13 powerful families, how it all worked. But in the 1970s, he was the first one to come out and speak about it publicly. That's key to this. That's the backstory. Turn up your volumes. Take a listen. This is John Todd. Here he is.
I come from a family where I grew up having my own heroes. My number one hero was my great, somewhere way back there, grandfather, named Francis Collins. Francis Collins owned the first ship that the Puritans landed in here. It just so happened that 50% of the people on board were also witchcraft people fleeing from Scotland. And they were called the Collinses. They were all his family, and that's how all witchcraft came to the United States. So when I grew up, I was being trained how great my family was, that it was the second most important family in the Illuminati and the occult world, and that someday I'd be very important and so on. So I had my own heroes. And television didn't help much. The reason I'm so down on television is I grew up around the television world, on the insides of it. When I was just a teenager, Hollywood paid for my way out to California so that I could bring a couple of diaries that belonged to my family that I had inherited by will as the last male heir of the Collins family. If you wondered why that fits with Todd's, the Collins family changed their name about 100 years ago to Todd to cover up some of the things that they had done. But I'm sure some of you will remember the show Dark Shadows. That was the show that paid for me to come to Hollywood to bring the diaries. Many of the scripts were taken from actual incidences in the diaries. And for instance, Barnabas Collins was based upon a man named Francis Williams Collins, a Revolutionary War hero. When I was growing up in the occult world, we were always taught that we had been somebody else before. It wasn't good enough that we were the person we were now. We always had to be a dozen people that we were before. We had to deal with this life and all the ones we were supposed to have had before and all the ones we were going to have in the future. And I was supposed to be in Francis Williams Collins. So I said that's who they based Barnabas on, so I wasn't exactly the nicest guy in the world. I grew up this way. When I was 13, I was taken into what is called the outer court to be trained as a priest in witchcraft. That had been like your pastor who just stepped off, or better yet, more like the youth director or something. When I was 18, I was initiated a high priest. That would have made me the pastor. At the same time, I became draft exempt. I did not have to go into service, but a bunch of us smart-aleck young, I have to correct the pastor, not warlocks, but wizards and witches, went into the army because we felt the army really needed witchcraft. It just couldn't get along without us. And since the army didn't think that they needed any chaplains that were witches, we just kind of went in on our own. So I went on in, along with a lot of others, and I never did anything, I guess, halfway. I got in Vietnam, found out I liked Vietnam so well, I was willing to re-enlist. In fact, I'd already signed the papers to stay for another tour in Vietnam when I became wounded in the last month of the first tour, and I was shipped back to the United States. My time was almost up, so I was discharged, and the same day I re-enlisted. I asked for Vietnam, and they said because of my wounds that hadn't totally healed yet, I couldn't go to Vietnam yet, so I got Germany. Now, I had re-enlisted for 6 years, and until the time of my re-enlistment, I always thought that witchcraft was just witchcraft. There was nothing more to witchcraft than just casting spells, and that we were smarter than the Christians and other religions because we really knew who the gods were, and we were born with special powers because our ancestors had passed them down to us, and all the little stories they like to tell us. Witchcraft was a little different at that time. When I first got into it as a young person, you had to be from a family that had generations after generations of witchcraft. In order to be a coven member at the time, you had to have 3 generations at least, while the minimum that I had that we could find was 7. So there wasn't any problem, and we knew it went past that where there weren't records kept anymore.
4 quick things, and then I want you guys to comment. Number 1, in that quick clip, he talks about the infiltration of the military. He talks about Hollywood. He talks about covens. How in some there were 3 generations. He was 7th generation that they could track. 7th generation that they could track as a calling. Nowadays, if you understand anything about magic or you're a witch, you can almost anyone could get into a coven. Mm-hmm. Almost anyone could get into a coven. Not saying everyone, but almost anyone can get into a coven. It's not the same. It's not what it used to be. So it's very interesting. Again, this is why you need to be careful with this whole ancestral.com and giving your own private information and who you are and where you have in your DNA. You need to be careful. But I digress. Let's start with Gary. Thoughts on the Collins and John Todd?
Yeah, compelling case for sure, and lots of detail that comes with his testimony. So whether or not it's 100% accurate or not, there's certainly going to be things in there that we should be, very much aware of and considering when we understand the world that we live in today. And that this is, what he's talking about is just sort of the leading edge or part of the leading edges of a worldwide set of organizations. So it's interesting about the Collins, and there's a few different clans of the Collins. Scotland's one. Ireland's kind of the where I kind of trace the beginning of the name to, essentially it means son of coal. And it could be son of nickel as well, depending on who you're listening to. But that name goes back to, nobility, not of extraordinary ennobled lines at that time, and maybe even back to the name Cullen, which means fair-haired, which probably is part of that history that's being encoded with the terms. And so they were understood of the lords or the kings of Munster, and I find that sort of interesting with the Munsters and Hollywood and stuff like that. So that's interesting. But Collins is a name that goes back, as they say, they get their history from, to the Milesians of the King of Spain that Skoda intermarried with and came over in that migration of these people to live amongst the Tuatha De Danann, or the fair folk, and giants and bloodline giants from the Milesians as well, and Scythians. So it's got a lot more history to it than if you're looking at it, sort of on the surface. And on their coat of arms, there's a few things going on. The two traditional ones are two lions, which would go back to probably a cherubim watcher in that taciturn language of their heraldry. And when we look at some of the names that, Collins isn't the most outstanding name in the occult by any stretch of the imagination, but the name shows up not only with Barnabas Collins that he talks about, but also you have another one named Quentin Collins in werewolf mythology and modern mythology and writings. You also have Andrew Collins, who wrote, Ashes of Angels, and very much involved in the occult. So there's a connection of this, and a connection more to the Rosicrucian side than the Illuminati side. But on the Illuminati side, I thought what was important was, the defeat of Christianity, and that is a significant role, and bringing about world government is the other agenda for the Illuminati. So that sort of rings kind of truthful for me as well. And when I look at one name that stands out in particular, not with the Illuminati, but to the group that's higher, where most of the mages, most of the magic, most of the significant sort of priests would come from, with the most power, would be a fellow by the name of Henry Collins Agrippa, who was a writer and a founder in around the early 1500s, who was key in establishing the Guild of Mages. And so the Guild of Mages is part of the pioneering organizations that are going to form the Rosicrucians. And so when we look at the Rosicrucians, they're more involved with Hollywood. They're more involved with the religious side of it. But the Illuminati's world government and destroying Christianity is their main goal. So I think there's a lot more that's in there. And it would not be uncommon for, in any of the migrations over, and I'll just finish on this because we're just sort of starting off, it would be unusual if there wasn't some people on the ship coming over to Plymouth, the Mayfair, or whichever ship he might have been on, his ancestors might have been on, that would be of the nobility and of the secret societies, because they're going to want to have control of every settlement that starts up, and are going to want to make their claims and be very much on the building block side. So all of that sort of rings fairly true to me. I think, he's an interesting character, and, they rose up against him by the looks of it, and made sure that he was not going to cause any more damage.
And Jesse, before we get to it, remember he said that a lot of money was raised through the stories told in the diaries that he brought with him from Scotland, a TV show called Dark Shadows. It was a gothic soap opera that aired on ABC from 1966 to 1971. It was about the lives of a Welthans Collins family who experienced supernatural events, things to do with the occult. There were rituals, and there was vampires and ghosts. Very, very strange. This TV show had a few seasons again, and he claims that this show was based on his family. In fact, they made a movie in Hollywood about this, the Collins. It starred Johnny Depp. That's interesting. Called Dark Shadows. So a spinoff from the TV show in that time. So again, how did he know? He had a great idea of what was going on. And how do you get that information in the 70s when he gave his testimony? Interesting stuff. Jessie, what do you have to say?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think he, probably did get the information from diaries or documents that they maybe kept. What's interesting is that even with their family crest, the Collins, you see the lions, as Gary said, which do represent a cherubic sign. And that connects then to, being under the house of Israel under Leah's bloodline. And that side, you're going to get a lot of administrative, the people who are keepers of the knowledge, keeping it in books or libraries or different, ways that they'll take care of things. And, that could be animals, that could be creatures. You see in some of the other Collins crests where, you get some mythical creatures that they're going to bring in there, like the griffin and others. And, could that be connected to maybe some of their tasks in the system? And you get at those deeper levels of witchcraft. He said a few things that really makes me think, that this family was into deeper things, like, the vampirism, were they involved with mythical creatures? Were they involved in procuring special things for, tinctures, spells? But he said, that they were those who knew who the gods were, that was passed down by their ancestors, and, that they were involved in generational witchcraft. So, to me, that says that they were part of that organized system that, we know that a lot of the Kabbalah, a lot of the what we would consider the upper level magic is all passed down through these family lines. So,
all right. Ooh. Again, this bloodline, it's a powerful bloodline. It's a strong bloodline. And it goes back, if it be true. And from my understanding, he didn't have any children. But the Collins are still a prominent family, a bloodline that goes back. He said 7 generations. That was documented. Gary, alluded to some of the other types of Collins that are out there. So it's ruled deep into the occult and rituals and witches and warlocks and magic. So watch out for that name. Another name I want to shine some light on. I've done a lot of work on this guy, and so much, but minimal that could come out, that what you have. And I'll let you guys both comment on it. I'll give you guys an opportunity. I'm talking about Alistair Crowley. He had a son. He had a daughter who apparently claimed to have died. The daughter's name was Lilith, interesting enough. His father was a preacher, for crying out loud. Can you believe that? His father was an actual preacher. But let me play a little bit about Alistair Crowley, and then we'll get into it and see if he still has any bloodline ties generationally, because he's a huge inspiration in rock music and politics today. This is Alistair Crowley. Take a look.
Alistair Crowley.
Alistair Crowley.
Alistair Crowley.
Alistair Crowley, the late Alistair Crowley, my very good friend.
This is Edward Alexander Crowley, also known as Alistair Crowley. He styled himself the wickedest man in the world.
The wickedest man in the world.
The wickedest man in the world.
The wickedest man in the world by the London newspapers.
The man who called himself the Beast 666.
The Golden Dawn's most notorious member was a self-confessed Satanist.
Others have affectionately dubbed him the most notorious occult magician of the 20th century.
Mr. Crowley has been instrumental throughout music.
Just the Crowleyism of, the times. It was a significant part of that middle point of the 70s.
Crowley was one of the pantheon of cult figures portrayed on the cover of the Beatles record, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Can't think of any other occultist who's been more influential on rock musicians than Alistair Crowley. No one close.
And he personally bragged of having slaughtered 150 male children in 1 year. This is why he was called the wickedest man in the world.
And through putting himself in deep hypnotic trances and the use of drugs on himself, he wanted to become the most powerful being in the world.
He was responsible for founding the religion and philosophy of sexual magic, Thelema, in which role he identified himself as the prophet entrusted with guiding humanity into the Aeon of Horus in the early 20th century.
He is a Freemason. It has its roots in Freemasonry and secret societies, which is essentially Luciferian doctrine. That is the sigil of Baphomet, the symbol of Baphomet.
I have found that at the very heart and core of all these secret societies lurks the Kabbalah.
A lot of the Kabbalah, a lot of ancient Egyptian deity as well.
In the Great Pyramid, Crowley conducted an occult ritual intending to access supernatural powers.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law. Love under will.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, and love is the law, love under will.
Do what thou wilt.
Do what thou wilt.
Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law. Love is the only law.
I'm me. I'm doing what I want to do.
I am who I am, and it's tattooed on my chest.
Well, I've been an admirer of Alistair Crowley. I think that I'm carrying on much of the work that he started over 100 years ago, and I think the 60s themselves. Crowley said, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Alistair Crowley, again, from my research and what I dug and what I tried to reach out, he had 2 kids. I tried to find out about their children and where they would be. I looked and tried to find the genealogy for these people. Again, his bloodline, his ancestors, they weren't occultists. His father was a preacher, but a strict preacher, meaning he would follow everything by the book, by the letter in the Bible. Very, very strict. And again, he had 2 children. However, a conspiracy that has been running around the internet for the past 10, 15 years. And when you read about it, some people say it came out as an April Fool's joke. But it's funny how truth and fiction blurs lines. And the conspiracy here is that Alistair Crowley had a daughter. And the daughter's name was Barbara Bush. And my, quite the conspiracy, but do they look alike?
I think you have to say there's a huge resemblance there. And that is in the upper levels that is taught that she is a ancestor of Crowley. So very interesting.
And again, marrying it into power, they keep the bloodline strong, marrying into the Bushes, and we could talk about that for a while. But magic is in the blood. That's what they say. We're going to get into that on that meaning and how it's passed on generationally. So, Gary, thoughts? What do you know about Alistair Crowley?
Yeah, he's an interesting character for sure. Quite visible and underlines a lot of sort of historical things about some of the lines that he may be connected to and or his organizations are connected to. So obviously Golden Dawn is a Rosicrucian order. And so that, fits in well with the magic side, which is, the priest, the high priest sort of side. And so when I look at Alistair Crowley, and his father being a preacher and a minister, that doesn't necessarily surprise me because of the infiltration factor that the polytheists have into Christianity to try and corrupt Christianity or lead people astray. So he could have been playing a very important role as a minister, but secretly doing a whole bunch of other different things and bringing Crowley up in polytheism versus monotheism. So there's a bloodline to the priesthood. bloodline that goes way back into history. So whether or not you look at Israelites and the Levites as being a bloodline set of priests, the Brahmins were the bloodline of the Zoroastrian, Eastern Zoroastrian, Indo-Aryan religion that settled into the Indus Valley, and that continued. And the bloodline of the priesthood is sort of a parallel bloodline that has a lot of power, but different than the royale, connected back to Indo-Aryans and giants. Shamans, another sort of understanding that tends to be, even in the more tribal communities, a bloodline just like the chiefs are. So again, we're starting to see this sort of history. And then when you start to look at magic, and you look at white faces, you look at shamans, you look at the trickster clowns, you look at the court jesters, in Day of the Dead celebrations, all of this has connections in the imagery and everything that is on display. And with Crowley, so if he's Rosicrucian, he's not going to be there unless he's of a bloodline. So his bloodline goes back to Ireland again, and it comes from, the name Crowley comes from the Gaelic word O Cradaleach, and it means a descendant or son of Cradaleach, and it's a Gaelic word, and it means hardy and hero. So a hardy hero, so a strong, hardy hero, and that his family derives from West Cork, as my research shows, and from a bloodline of chiefs and rulers, and kind of almost more of a warrior upper class than a royale sort of upper class. And so that clan of warriors goes back to a specific patriarch or giant, O Cradaleach. And again, as that's understood, it means hero, champion, or warrior. On his coat of arms, it looks like a bull. Not a bull, a boar. So that's not typically a fallen angel or an angelic order that we would have a name attached to. But anything that's on those heraldic coat of arms would go back eventually to a fallen angel. We don't get told of all what the angelic order, what their faces are. So we know, like in books like Pistis Sophia, there is a god with the face of a bull. Face of a boar, and one with the face of a bull. You have serpents, you have lions, you have all sorts of things that are in with those watchers. That's in the pit prison in the Gnostic Gospel of Pistis Sophia. So again, looking at it more from either a priest set or more likely a warrior class, but all of them would have access to be able to become part of the organizational structure, and everybody within the bloodlines have a role that they're initiated in and taught from life. So all of that combines with why he would be Rosicrucian, because he was of a bloodline and initiated from early childhood.
There you go. Jessie, thoughts on what you're want to add about Alistair Crowley?
Definitely. I'm so glad you brought up about, the crest. It's really interesting. Kind of like how they differentiated is that you have different images representing those archangels, and the boar is going to go along the west with the ox. It could be an ox, a horse, any type of what they would consider like a farm-like or domestic animal would be along with categorized with the west there under those archangel symbols. So, it's interesting when you look at that. What was his stronghold in those areas, even internationally. You would have, those, the UK, Scotland, Ireland, all of those kind of being considered Western quadrants internationally. And that was kind of where he had his big influence initially as it began to spread. And you get then, another interesting connection is with the thelemic magic. He being someone who took that first Solomonic seal of the sun to a new level. Now, I don't know time-wise if, he was the first one to connect different forms of sex with that, like beyond just sex with children or boys. You have where the system gets into the sex with, the demonic as well as the bestiality. I think that those went back further than the thelemic magic, but I think that he's the one who kind of made it popular in a way. And in that you've got different, you have where then it kind of set the tone for a lot of the base upper levels, the Order of the Phoenix, the Order of the Golden Dawn, the Order of Melchizedek, that there were a certain series of the Solomonic seals that they had to go through to enter into those upper levels, which then became things that were used in blackmail against them. Different signs that they would use, the do as thou wilt, shall be the whole extent of the law. And, that goes back then to scripture itself, where you have Lucifer declare 5 times, I will. I will ascend, I will rise up. He goes on and on. So, he was a real forerunner in things. I don't know if I'd classify him as the most evil with only a count of 150 children killed in 1 year, but he was evil.
What to kind of just double tap on that thelemic ideology and I will. In the New Testament, the word will comes from the Greek word thelem, as in God's will, or as in Lucifer will, and is also translated a couple of times poorly, as in sexual, like orgy or crimes, in the book of Revelation and one other location. And I don't think that is done without thought. I won't go any further into it than that. Yeah,
that's great insight.
And again, just to add to that, yes, he may have been more upfront with that style of magic, but that goes back to the Canaanites, and we know that Knights Templar also participated in children's sacrifices and so forth. We're gonna get into that, but yeah, I just think that he owned it and put it forward. But that's definitely more ancient magic that was already done at Canaanite era, and we're going to touch on that. Another bloodline I want to touch on. This one, guys, man, this is a difficult one, and there's a lot to be said about this. And I want to discuss King Solomon. Now, King Solomon was, loved and revered by many. He's biblically documented as being one of God's favorites. He received knowledge. And King Solomon had 1,000 wives, not to mention how many concubines he had. So he had many, many children. Bloodlines go, bloodlines go. Someone today could have that bloodline connected to King Solomon, who is known for his magic, who's known for Solomonic magic and a lot of power. However, when you dive deep into this stuff, it seems that maybe the most connected, the highest powers, keep it secretive, not to share that information. The only thing that I could come across publicly, because even on the inside, when you're studying this type of stuff, unless you're super, super high up, it's taught to you by somebody. And the only thing I could come across is the Solomonic dynasty. Some people say this didn't really exist, but this is the claim, is that this bloodline, descendants of King Solomon, and we're talking about Queen Sheba and the story of her going to see Solomon, and they say that nothing was confirmed biblically, but it says that anything she asked for, she received. Did she ask for a child? We don't know that to be for certain. That's a tale that's told. That's what they say, but never really documented. Let me play this quick clip about the Solomonic dynasty, and I'd like to get both your takes on this. Take a look.
Ethiopia and its Solomonic dynasty. This dynasty, which ruled the nation for centuries, claimed descent from the biblical King Solomon himself. This connection played an essential role in Ethiopian history and cultural identity, shaping the course of the nation's development and influencing its relations with the world. The Kebra Nagast, a 14th century compilation of stories, forms the basis of this claim. It tells the tale of the Queen of Sheba's visit to King Solomon, who, according to the text, fathered a son with her named Menelik. Menelik later brought the Ark of the Covenant back to Ethiopia, establishing a divine connection with his homeland. This connection formed the basis for the Solomonic dynasty's rule over Ethiopia, starting in the late 13th century. The Kebra Nagast is not only a vital source for Ethiopian history, but also a significant literary work that demonstrates the Ethiopian people's talent for storytelling and their deep connection to their faith.
Solomonic dynasty. Does that hail from the child born from King Solomon and Queen Sheba? Thoughts? We'll begin with you, Gary.
Well, they believe that, that's for sure. That's a dynastic bloodline that goes back a long ways. I don't think it's as documented as some of the genealogists would be in Europe in terms of how they do that, but who knows, it might be. So is it possible? Certainly is possible. We know Solomon took many wives and wives led him astray, and that if there was a Torah that went back that became the Kebra Nagast, then they would have the instructions in there in terms of how to make the Ark of the Covenant into detail. And the Ark of the Covenant is still in Jerusalem until the time of the fall of the temple to Nebuchadnezzar, about 590 BC. So I think there's many arks that might be out there. A lot of them would be prototypes, not prototypes, but copies, let's put it that way. And they guard it with a special bloodline of priests down there who act as guardians to protect it. So what's interesting, though, is that Queen of Sheba was already a royale. And the implication from having a child with Solomon is that in the royale's understanding of starting a new dynasty, and in this case, a new ennobled dynasty, that begins with a pureblood female matriarch with someone else of significant importance. And in this case, this is son of David, and, you know, the second in the line to the Davidic monarchy. And this is not uncommon that this type of thing might happen, and it creates possible bloodlines for Antichrist as you sort of connect that back. And even with David, this went on. I mean, David, what he does is he does a lot of wars, and he becomes the sort of the warrior king, and Solomon the priest king, until he becomes corrupted by the wives through all of the treaties. And David does a treaty like that, where he makes a treaty with the king of Geshur, and these are Geshurim giants in the land of giants of Bashan, and his name is Talmai, patronymic king title of the Anakim giants out of Hebron. And he has a daughter named Maacah, which is also a matriarchal title and name that gets passed down in several different ways, as well as with Maacah being a male name, and the Maacah theme from a Maacah patriarch for the Maacah theme that live in the same area and are also giants, just as Goliath's father was named Maacah. Again, show you how those things sort of come downstream through time. And that David accepts with the treaty Maacah as his wife, and then there's going to be another Maacah in the next generation as well within Israel. But what's important is that the son becomes Absalom. And what Absalom, he's called the fairest of them all, and then he gets ostracized for breaking the law in protecting the name of his sister. Won't go into all the details of it, but he goes back to Geshur, and he plots with Talmai to overthrow the Davidic throne and starts a civil war. And when he comes back to the land of the covenant, where does he set up his base camp location for the civil war? In Hebron, Kiriath Arba. Arba is the patriarch of the Anakim giants, where Talmai first shows up as part of the three kings of the Anakim in the scouts report in Numbers 13. So secret societies also draft Solomon as one of the greatest magicians of all time. and as a black magician, and that he had the ability in their accounts to control demons. And we get in the Quran, and we also get, I think, in the Book of Solomon, the testimony of Solomon, where he used a ring to control the demons. I think if he had that amount of power from God, he wouldn't need anything. He would just have the authority to command the demons, but I don't think they were used to build the temple. I don't think he would use demons to build the Holy of Holies where the Ark's going to be located. It just makes no sense to me. But he's drafted nonetheless as this great matriarch and mason who gets the building knowledge from King Tyr, Canaanite civilization of the Phoenicians, that provides the building technology to build the temple, and teaches the Israelites in the art of building, and creates masons there and mason societies thereafter that come downstream that will end up in secret societies like the Freemasons.
Jessie, thoughts? What do you have to say? Your opinion on the Solomonic dynasty, or the bloodline of one Solomon?
Yeah, I think, it certainly is interesting. And I think for me, like some of the things that come out, like we know that there was a, temple that was there in Ethiopia. The kind of the theories behind that temple, or that came, was established by the Queen of Sheba and by her descendants. They considered it a second temple to the Lord, but Israel did not acknowledge that temple. They would have nothing to do with it. And there's documents that were connected to the Dead Sea Scroll findings, where they have letters from the priests that were in that Ethiopia temple, petitioning Israel to come and help them because they were getting attacked by the Egyptians in Ethiopia, who were, upset that they were sacrificing the god Canute, which is the sheep god. So, I mean, there's so much that comes down in the occult history about Solomon, about his descendants. I'd be curious with Gary's knowledge to know, is there a connection between that Ethiopian Queen Sheba link and the secret societies that are connected to that black nobility, particularly, those that are, claim to be that black nobility?
Yeah, through intermarriage there is, and Sali Halassi, I think, was the last emperor of Ethiopia. He has membership into a lot of and maybe his offspring does as well, because they would kind of inherit that through the bloodlines. I think that's how that works. He would have been on part of the Royal Masonic secret societies. So I'm trying to remember what he connected into. It might have been the house the one of the Anjou orders, which would be, in this case, I think, the Order of the Golden Fleece. And also interesting, Queen Elizabeth held a chair at the upper organizational structure of that one as well, even though they have their own Hanover, Windsor Order of the Garter, which is the senior one, versus the lower level that they would sort of award membership into for like politicians, for lower level bloodlines and things like that. So he has in his lifetime, when he lived, he made sort of claims to perhaps being Masonic, and so that would go back to that complete mythos, but that was acknowledged and well understood as a recognized bloodline by the European bloodlines.
Yeah. Again, his bloodline, I'm sure, exists. I'm sure the purest, this is just coming from a former occultist, and I could be wrong here, folks, but bear with me here. I believe that whatever bloodline or purest form of his bloodline exists today is part of a very powerful coven. It's not going to be public. We're not going to know about it, because there's strength and power to his secrecy, or that person's secrecy. And again, the ring that he received, that he had, if that ring still exists, that would be passed on generation to generation in the bloodline. And that would belong to someone of the bloodline, because it's the only time that power is its strongest. I know when people read different diaries or grimoires on magic, it's always in the blood. So even though somebody might want these treasures, these things that hold power, it's always more powerful when it's connected to the blood of the ancestors, and it's generational. So if they exist and they still have that ring, there's a lot of power in that, I believe, that they probably try to use in magical ceremonies and rituals. Let's just touch on that really briefly before we move on to the next one. Jessie?
Yeah, I mean, they use those rings. Those rings also are a form of contract for them, representing the different allegiances that they have. On the Solomonic ring specifically, you have the right side up triangle and the upside down triangle, which represent the base holy and unholy contracts. Together, they could become the seal of Israel. So, yeah, it definitely is considered a ring of power for sure.
Gary?
So imagery of Lord of the Rings should come to mind, and the ring of giant kings that were at Nippur or at Mount Hermon or Mount Olympus, both before and after the flood, and more relevant to after the flood. The ring of kingship, and symbolized by a ring that they would wear, and people even to this day kiss that ring of kingship because they are awarded divine authority from the upper council at Mount Hermon and Nippur and all the other holy mountains that are used in polytheism around the world, where the council of the gods would award that authority to that kingship and bloodline. That goes, right back to the, right after the flood and before the flood. It's a tradition that sort of continued. And the ring was also used to, as Jessie was talking about, was it would have their heraldic imagery on that, whatever it was, that they would imprint into the wax for the seals. That would be a sign of their authority, a separate ring, but a ring nonetheless. And the ring goes to their whole circle of magic, their whole circle of wheel worship, of everything that's done in a circuit, on traveling on pilgrimages. The circle, the wheel is just it's got multiple applications, both physically and allegorically, as to the religion of particularly the religion of the Indo-Aryan giants. And even if you look at the holy 8 Sabbaths of the occult, that's formed into a wheel. And so, Baal cycle is the wheel. It's such an important imagery, and it's constant all over the world.
Yeah.
Incredible
also,
stuff.
can I add one more thing with that quick too? As you're talking about the imagery, like it also represents the mountain of God above, built up, like Babel was built up, but then it represents a mountain built underneath the going down, and that gets into the yellow and the blue lights, energy spectrums, all sorts of form of, magic power. So it's really interesting when you get into that. And the government, their imagery, they use that mountain imagery to also represent the government, the name of God. So, interesting.
Now I'm smiling because this comment popped up, and it's so true, from Pablo. I know what you're thinking, George. The hour is nearly up, but hold it. Don't do it. I like that. It's quite funny. I have no choice. I have to do it. We have to move on to Patreon. We have a beautiful Q&A coming up, and all of you could be a part of it. But we still got about 10 minutes or so, which is a great time to get into the final bloodline. It's a people. It's a race. And I'm curious as to what you both have to say about these people, because they worship many gods. And when it comes to magic, no other people that I know of is really associated with them. In fact, the Lord said, kill them, these Canaanites. And they worship gods like Moloch and Baal. Of course, Baphomet came later, but Moloch and Baal, of course, were very, very popular. and they were known to be the child eater. These are the evil gods that this bloodline, these people used to worship, the Canaanites. So let's begin with you, Gary, or I should say Jessie. On this one, we'll begin with Jessie because I think Gary's going to have a little bit of a longer one. So what do you know from your research or people you've come in contact with about the bloodline of the Canaanites, Jess?
Yeah, so we find that, that bloodline described in scriptures in the book of Genesis, and it talks about how the Lord called Abraham to come out, out from among them. And that's where you see the Lord giving Abraham a promise that he will make him a great nation. He will have an heir, and the Lord has intentions to establish, Israel, a nation that would be set apart and holy to the Lord. And, that they wouldn't have an earthly king. They would have the Lord as their king and their God. And that would be a witness and a sign to the nations that, of God. So it's interesting. And, we hear all the things that you just brought up in scripture, that the Canaanites, sacrificed children, they cannibalized, they were engaged in all forms of sorcery, divination, witchcraft. In the occult, a lot of the occultic practices go back to the land of Canaan. They connect that to different things that they're going to do. And you have bloodlines that actually, claim to come out of the Canaanites. You have different sects of people, SECT, where, you get some of the upper level priestess groups like the Seraphaical priestesses. They even go as far as beyond, being connected to the old Canaanite and Phoenician type priestess groups. They even claim that that they come from descendants of Miriam, who is Moses and Aaron's sister. Then you get, the Phoenician priestesses, who are connected like to the priestesses of Delphi, the priestesses of Melissa, the priestesses of Gaia, where their family lines actually stem from those Canaanite, ancestry. So it's still common today. I mean, they still, women will be brought into those priestess groups because of their bloodline and connection with either, they're classified as Phoenician goddesses or the Canaanite goddesses.
Gary, did the Canaanite bloodline get completely destroyed? Do they exist today? Because they were one of the firsts when it comes to rituals and magic. Talk to me about the Canaanites.
Well, the Canaanites in the generic term are all of the 12 tribes that are listed in Genesis 10, not just the one from Canaan, but also the families of the Canaanites, which are hybrids. So you've got 12 clans, but only 3 are listed with a patriarch: Canaan, Seth, and Haydn. And then you get the Amorites, you get the Jebusites, you get the Archites, you get all of those 9 patriarchalists. And that's because those were produced by a Rephaim, or a giant patriarch. And so even with the 3 that are listed, because they're sons of Noah in the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 and 1 Chronicles, they're going to intermarry amongst the giants, and they're all going to become hybrids. So now you've got many tribes. You've got 12 different nations there of Canaanites that are all practicing the same religion. So when we look at the Ugaritic texts, that's Canaanite, that's Amorite, that is the home of the Rephaim as well. Ugarit would be Kiriath Ugarit in the original Semitic, meaning city of Og, the terrible one. And you just can't make this stuff up. And it's a dynastic bloodline, and that's where they have the Council of the Datanu of giant tribes, and that the Rephaim are created by Anat and Baal and all the various names of the Baalim, and that is used in plural in the Old Testament, as well as Baal in singular. So this includes other nations other than the Canaanites that are worshiping this religion. So you have in Moab, Baal is called Chemosh or Chemosh, depending on how you want to pronounce that. Phoenicians, it's Baal. Amorites, it's Baal. Edomites, it's Hadad and Baal. And Aramaic is Baal Hadad. And Melkart is the Philistine name. And Melkart, he has, some interesting relationships to the Greek pantheon, but I won't go down that route right now. And Adad, A-D-A-D, as it's understood in Mesopotamia, transferred there and probably added to that pantheon, or at least that name is added to the pantheon in the time of the Babylonian reign by Amorites, with famous kings like, I'm trying to think of the one who introduced the law. Anyways, it doesn't really matter. I just want to get this information in before we close off. So this is a religion that comes down into the bloodlines as they keep those genealogies all back to specific giant patriarchs, back to specific gods. So for example, you might have Amur, who also has a giant offspring in the Ugaritic text named Amur or Amuru. And that's the patronymic name that's used to name the Amorites after. Jebus would be the patriarch for the Jebusites in there, just to give another example out of those 9 that are patriarchless. So when we look at, do these bloodlines survive? I mean, particularly through the Phoenicians and through the Edomites, let alone the royal bloodlines that remain in the Arabic region. And Canaanite DNA shows up significantly in the Arabic nations, and particularly in the Saudi region, where the Edomites lived. So Edomites are interconnected into various bloodlines, whether it's Scythian Khazars, but they're part of the scioning into the royales that are going into Europe. So it's important to sort of understand that these giants were either Rephaim and or Anakim, because when you get into the Phoenicians, which supply bloodlines into the junior, as they're called in Italy, only because they migrate out of Phoenicia to Venice and Florence, become the merchants and the banking arm, like the Medicis. They're the junior to the senior black nobility that would take their bloodlines back to the 100 senators, back to Romulus and Remus, and back to Ares as the parent god for the bloodline of the Julia gens, for example. And so Phoenician kings weren't necessarily Rephaim. So on the coast versus Ugarit, which is halfway, say, between Tyre and Mount Hermon, they would have had Anakim giants, and they're called Anaki. And they would take names after their gods, like Abi Baal, or my father is Baal. And they believed that they were dynastic kings created by Baal and the Baalim gods, and that these bloodlines continue as, if not purebloods, but more likely scion bloodlines into bloodlines all through Europe and wherever else, because giants would have migrated all around the world. We know Phoenicians went all around the world, including to North America. So we could see their bloodlines everywhere, is the short answer.
They're everywhere. Basically, what you're saying is bloodlines of magic are everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Guys, I talked about this being in the blood. And before we sign off, I think I want to just end off with that, and I'll give my take on it, Jesse's take. We'll do a quick Gary roundup, and then we'll head on over to Patreon for our Q&A after show. They say magic is in the blood, meaning it's passed on generationally. Sometimes they may skip a person for whatever reason, but there is a attachment, a spiritual being. Some in the occult call it a gift or a guardian angel. That's not the case. And it's passed on in the blood. It's why someone that is new to performing rituals and magic could be good, and someone that is not, practicing that all the time, but has ancestors, and the blood that runs through their veins goes back centuries, rooted in magic rituals, are always better at doing certain things. This is what I've come to learn in the world of the occult and magic. So in the blood is a lot of power. In the blood is magic. In the blood is generational. There's something about it. Is it a curse? Is it a gift? Whatever it is definitely passed on. And a lot of people in the world can't explain certain things that happen to them. Their kids could see things, they could hear things, they have special abilities. Are they born with that? Or is it passed on through their blood and their ancestors that goes back years? We'll begin with Jessie.
I think that's a great question. Is it a marker that they maybe use to identify, those that they consider the seed of the serpent, or those connected to whether it's the Canaanite bloodlines, or, those that are going to go way back in the occult. I do believe that there's ways that they try to identify those. But what's interesting is that, within the system, you've got those that, make decisions for the children. Like, I've talked about how you'll have the mothers of darkness walk past, children in rows of lines and field trips. And, just in a split second, they'll decide if that child is considered a hierarchy child or expendable. Is there something in the spirit that they see, rather than it necessarily being per se just the blood? Is there something that, is over the soul that they can see on that child that, then dictates what that child is used for? So it's a fascinating thing when you really get into it. What is that marker, and what sets it apart, or, distinguishes it?
Gary, the power of magic passed on generationally through the blood. Is it a thing? Does it make sense? Is it real? Your thoughts on this?
Yep, get to that in just a second. Jessie had mentioned earlier about the female prophets, which was a big part of the Canaanite religion, particularly in Tyre and all throughout. So the main connector for people to remember on that, this is the Phrygian belief system of prophets and prophecies in Delphi, and that's the Cybele, and as it was known in Canaan in Asia Minor, whether it's in Tyre or Sidon, or with the Hittites, it was Kibble with a K. And typically in those languages, you could do a C or a K, but they're pronounced a little bit differently. So one of the examples on that might be the horn-headed god in Indo-Aryan language, which would be a pan god. That could be C-E-R-N as in CERN, or K-E-R-N as Kern, which means in Hebrew K-E-R-E-N. Q is the word instead of the letter instead of the K there in Hebrew. Also means horn and mountain. So those words are very common as they come down. So what gets passed on? How does it get passed on? In their belief system, from what my research shows, it's the gene. And it's the gene that produces the blood and produces the blood type. And the main factor down is through the matriarchal bloodline. But the gene overall, they've got an allegorical name of the fairy or the elven gene, which again is a matriarchal allegory as well, also known as the gene of Isis, taking it back to a specific mother goddess, in this case an offspring god. And it can also come and be understood in a male gene as well, but still passed down through the matriarchal side. And that would be like the Julia gens that I was talking about earlier with Ares and Romulus and Remus, and the Julia gens of the Roman nobility and the senior black nobility. It could be the Elbe gens from Albion. It could be the Cretazens from Zeus, just as Zeus created through Alcmene, and he had many children, but in this one, the Herculean bloodline of the Gyges kings, which are the tyrants that Nephilim are associated with and part of the definition. So it's the genes in their belief system that produces the blood type and gives them the gifts. So it's this physical gene that was passed down from the original Celestial Mafia Godfathers down through the patriarchal and matriarchal giants.
And that sums up our show tonight, guys. Magic Bloodlines. And again, we only touched on a few, and there's so much more to come. And I'm telling you, it's going to be a very interesting after show on Patreon at the Reveal Report. The link is in the description. We're going to have a Q&A with Gary and Jessie. You get to ask some questions. I think Sam had a great question about King Solomon. And I'm sure she's going to ask that in the after show and a few others. So follow us over there. Guys, we can't wait to announce next month's schedule. We'll post that next week. Gary, I got a list, but are you back in December or is it January?
I think we've got a December date, and I think we got a couple January dates.
Awesome. Yes.
Before we sign off, Book 2 on the audio version,
yes, of course,
should be out this week unless there's any more delays at the Amazon level. So it'll be on Amazon, Audible, and iTunes this week. And of course, Book 1 came out a couple of months ago and is doing quite well on the Audible. Also available in Kindle versions and printed.
So there you go. And of course, I have his website and the information in the description. You can click on it. It'll take you to Gary's site. You can buy the book on Amazon, but you can order it directly from his site. He'll sign it, send it to you, and a whole bunch of other stuff. And the Audible is what I've been asking for years, because I could be on the treadmill listening to it or walking around. So I'm excited to hear. Whose voice do you use, Gary?
Mel Jackson. And he's experienced in old languages, names, pronunciations, things like that. And we had a delay on Book 2 because before he started Book 2, he redlined 3 times and had an out of body experience, and had to recover enough to come back and do Book 2. So
now, I gotta say one thing. My dream audiobook, one of your books, obviously it cannot happen. But if I could hear the voice of Charlton Heston from the 10 Commandments from Moses, to actually read your book with his voice, tell me that wouldn't be incredible.
It would be incredible. Mel's got a bit of an English accent, so.
I can't wait. Again, we thank you for being here, Gary. I'll announce all the dates that you're here in December, January. Very excited, and you always bring great information. Jessie, before we sign off, anything you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, no, I mean, thinking about, gifts this season, I think that the audio is the way to go for your family, your friends, everybody. And I just encourage you to join us in the after show.
Excellent, guys. Appreciate that. Guys, again, I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us. And for those who don't know, we had a special person help us out. I got to do a shout out to Lisa M. Lisa M. for being a great supporter on PayPal this week. Thank you so much, Lisa M. It makes a huge difference. Lisa wants this show on the air on YouTube every single Monday, because this was going to be just exclusively to Patreon subscribers. And she sent me a message. She goes, everyone needs to hear this message. Everyone needs to be a part of it. And she definitely helps keep the show going every single Monday. So thank you in the comment section for Lisa M. Thank you, Lisa. Guys, you guys are great. I want to thank you all for being here. And we hope you join us on the after show coming up next on Patreon. The link is in the description, and I hope to see all of you there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. Peace out, everyone.